Now I want you to turn to page 5. Page 5. This is a pretty large table of some comparative data of faculty. What we have is USA number 1 through USA number 9. That's 9 different American samples. KSA is Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This was done at King Saud. BRA is Brazil. COL is Colombia. But we've also had data from Russia, Estonia, China, Japan, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Germany, and a few other countries that I can't remember right now. So these, if you go down, let's say column number 1, USA, you'll see it goes from 1 to 9.5. That's because there was a tie for number 9. So that's how Americans in that sample rated those items. So if you go back, you take a look, okay, item number 2 had a ranking of 5. Item number 2 is approachable, personable. So on and so forth for everybody. Take a look at KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And sort of go back and forth between this table and the table on page 3, and that'll tell you what Middle Eastern faculty, these are men, we haven't done it with women. So women, if you want to do some research, here's a pretty good idea, and I would be happy to collaborate with you on that. Take a look at where the Middle Eastern faculty put different things. They rated as number 1, number 14, knowledge. Number 2, they rated as number 19, which would be promotes critical thinking. So just take a look at that for a minute. So we're able now to compare cultures. We compare teachers across cultures as to what they value in excellent teaching. So we have really tried to develop universal principles of excellence of teaching. What I've done here is I've shown you several items: being knowledgeable, being enthusiastic, promoting critical thinking, being approachable and personable, being creative and interesting, being an effective communicator. Those, if we take a look at all the samples across the world, those are the ones that most frequently appear. So regardless of your culture, regardless of how advanced society is, regardless of the cultural political milieu that exists in that culture, we could talk about teaching using a common language. These are the key items. So in my tutoring of teachers, this is where I start. So I tell people, if you want to improve your teaching, these are the things that are most important across the globe in becoming an effective teacher. And then I can go right to the list of behaviors that correspond with it. Sir, you had a question or a comment?
Sorry, interrupting you, but
Oh, that's okay.
how would you analyze those blanks that they left out? Like,
Oh, those blanks are things that did not appear in the top 10.
right.
Okay, yeah. So, if you take a look at that table, which page is that, 5?
Yes.
Okay, take a look at the table, page 5. You'll see a lot of blank spaces. Those are items that for that particular sample of research participants, those items did not figure in the top 10. Now, if you go across to the very last column, you'll have for each of the 28 items on the TBC, the number of times that item appears across those cultures. So, for example, take a look at number 8. Take a look at number 19. Take a look at number 14. Those items were valued as top 10 items across every single culture in that sample. So we have 8, 14, and 19. So 8 would be enthusiastic, 14 would be knowledgeable, and 19 would be promoting critical thinking. Now, here's what's really, really, really interesting. If we do the same things with students, do we get the same results? Most of us would say no. That's what I said. In the United States of America, at an R1 university, research university, there's a 60% overlap. Faculty and students put 6 of those items in their top 10. And when you get to a smaller school where teaching is really, really important, That goes up to 8 out of 10, 80%. Now, remember I said what's really, really interesting are those data. Here's the essence. Faculty. Where faculty differ from students is that they put teaching techniques, aspects of the actual process of communicating information, they rate that higher than students do. Students, on the other hand, rate social aspects of the teacher-student relationship higher. Students want to know that the person up there in front of class is trustworthy, is responsible, is going to be caring, is going to be respectful. Faculty already have enough relationships. They don't want any more. Students come at it from very different. Now, when you give this assignment to master teachers, teachers who are excellent, their list looks more like the student list than the faculty list. So what those people do, and the word was mentioned over there on one of the posters, they understand the value of the social connection or rapport with students. It is possible to be a highly effective teacher and still be a good human being. In fact, if you're not a good human being, I would argue that you have a very difficult time being a master teacher. You know, in recent years, there's been a word that's come about, and that is student-centered or learning-centered teaching. And you have to ask yourself, as opposed to what? What's the opposite of that? What is that not? And what we come up with is the opposite of that, at least according to Western research, is someone who's interested only in the transferal of information. So student-centered teaching is the opposite of lecture-centered information or teacher-centered information, where the teacher is sort of the object of attention. And what we find is that when we evaluate, use this document, the TBC, the Teacher Behavior Checklist, as an evaluation instrument, teachers who are student-centered get higher and more positive evaluations than teachers who are teacher-centered or lecture-oriented. So the point that you're making is a really good one. There are very differences in those two approaches. So, very good point. Thank you. Any other things? Well, let's just take a few minutes. We have about 9 minutes left before the break. Let me introduce project-based learning. Okay, we're finally getting to what we're after today. My rationale for taking so long to do this is that I want you to realize that it's not the technique that's important, but it's you who's really important. If you're a bad teacher and you learn project-based teaching, you're simply a bad teacher with a new technique to be bad at. Okay? That's what you are. So I really want you to remember, if you remember anything about this, is that what you do as a teacher makes a difference in the lives of students. You can still be a bad teacher with a good technique. Okay? With that in mind, let me remind you of a distinction that we made earlier that was raised by one of the men about what PBL means. Project-based learning is different only a little in problem-based learning. Project-based learning means that you're going to come away with a product at the end, a project. So you're going to have the students create a poster, or give a paper, or do a podcast, or do a blog, or create a website, or create some product, some device. In problem-based learning, it takes place over a shorter period of time, sometimes in just a class period, or part of a class period, and it's going to involve solving a particular problem. Now, it may mean that you develop a product, or that you put the final thing in a podcast or a website, but it doesn't have to be. Whereas in project-based learning, they have to produce a product. And that product has to be accessible by the public, by other students or you, or somebody out there, somebody in the real world. Okay? Project-based learning is a Western concept. It developed in the West, and here's what's really interesting. When the dean's office called me and said, would you come here and give a talk for us on project-based learning? I said, wait a minute. Are you sure you mean project-based? Don't you mean problem-based? He said, no. I mean project-based. Let me emphasize that The problem should be real. It should be, you know, I love being a college professor because we're around so many smart people in so many disciplines. And there's so many problems to solve in those disciplines. And one thing I like about psychology is it's becoming more and more of an interdisciplinary type of thing. I think probably 20, 30 years from now, there won't be a psychology department. They will integrate psychologists in departments throughout the university because psychology affects everything. Psychology is basically chemistry. It's basically biology. It's basically social. All those things come together. So it's really interesting that way. So I think you've got to remember that when you are going to develop a project-based learning platform, it's got to deal with problems in your discipline that exist out there. So what that does, it makes the students up to date. What are the current problems in the field? What is it that your field is facing? And I want to emphasize that you have to create an environment where the students are going to do a project, that it's going to produce a product. So, project-based learning must relate to your student outcomes. In other words, you don't want to have them do a project that's not related to what you want to accomplish in that class. You don't want to have them do a project just for the sake of doing a project. It's got to be related to your class. It's got to be tied into your learning objectives. It's got to be specific. The more specific the project, the better projects you're going to get. Just like this list of terms. The more specific we are in defining these terms, the more you know what they mean, the more you know how to implement those in your own teaching. It's going to involve a long, long project. So I'm going to ask you, when we come back from break, to design a project-based learning experience for your students. I want it to be a semester-long project. Not a week, not 2 weeks, not a half a semester. I want it to be something they have to do the entire semester. So it's going to require a lot of effort on their part. Okay, so I want it to be a semester-long project. This is difficult for a lot of professors. You've got to turn this part of the class over to them. You have to let them make mistakes. You can't say, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. Because that is going to diminish the creative process that you want those folks to engage in. Okay. So, take a deep breath, let go. Let go. Be prepared for chaos. Okay? That's what learning really is chaos. It's a series of mistakes that are corrected. And it never ends. You know? What did Michelangelo say when he was 85 years old? He said, I'm still learning. I'm still learning. Okay, this is where you come in. Periodically, throughout the semester, you will be meeting one-on-one with your students. Sometimes one-on-one means meeting with a group. Sometimes a meeting with individual students. Depends how you set it up. But your job is to provide them gentle guidance. Again, you're not going to tell them what to do, but you're going to suggest. You're going to say, well, you may want to look at this. You may want to try to approach this just a little bit differently. Don't tell them how to approach it. Tell them to think about it in a different way. Expand their minds. Expand their minds. Get them to think outside the box. And finally, and I can't say this enough, they got to do something real, something tangible. This is this last item is a primary website for project-based ideas. And on the handout, the end of the handout, I give you a list of 4 or 5, I think as well. Okay. I want you to, and I'm not going to ask you to share this, I'm just going to ask you to do this inside of your head. I want you to do 2 things for me. I want you to think about that long list of qualities that we mentioned, and you can look at your notes if you want. And I want you to think, what do you do particularly well? What is your strongest characteristic of a teacher? And again, this is just to yourself. And then I want you to do the flip side. Where do you need to improve as a teacher? What is it that you really, really need to do? And then I'm going to leave you with a challenge. And the challenge is, I want you to address that area of weakness in your semester of teaching this fall. I want you to take a look at yourself seriously and rationally and say, I'm going to find a way to become a better teacher by focusing on this. Okay, so let's just take a minute or two, think about those things, maybe jot something out in your notes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about project-based learning. So let's get back to what I'm going to refer to for the rest of the day as PBL, project-based learning. During the break, there was a little bit of a discussion that I had with a gentleman, and he raised some really good questions. And one question about PBL is, that's all you do in a course? You don't teach, you just come up with a project for students to do and they turn it in at the end? Or should it be in addition to what you're doing in a regular course? And the way most people do it in regular courses is the teacher works on the content, the students continue to come to class every day. Every now and then a class is devoted to part of the project, and it's an add-on. Now if you're in a capstone course, it should be project-based. There should be some product that you produce as a result of it. But even in that course, the teacher still has a function. And the function is to provide feedback at various stages of the project. So I think it's important to remember that's going to be your job now. Remember, I think it was the ladies who were emphasizing, one of you anyway, were talking about being a facilitator. And that's what you do as a teacher in project-based learning. You're basically there to provide feedback. Not all the answers, but just give students a little bit of a direction. Okay? So what we're going to do in this last hour and 15 minutes is we're going to talk about the basic steps that you need to follow in carrying out a project. I'm going to give you an example from my own teaching, and then I'm going to turn you loose, and you're going to basically spend the rest of the day writing. Okay? So the sort of the classroom portion is over in just a few minutes. So there's a series of steps that you follow to do PBL. Some people say there's 10 steps, some say there's 15, some say there's 4 or 5. I believe that there's 6. So I'm going to give you those 6 now. The first one, obviously, is you've got to decide on the issue, the problem, or the question. And how do you do that? Do you come up with all the ideas? Or do you give students the opportunity to come up with the ideas? Or do you do some combination? That's going to depend upon you and what you want to accomplish.
We give it to the student decision.
And that's what I do.
And then they come up with the new ideas. Then we discuss the idea, issues are really the standard, up to the standard. Then we will decide whether we go with this issue or problem as a project. If otherwise we give some modification in their idea, then we come up with the solution.
That's pretty close to the model I actually use in my class. But some people, some places they'll actually have a list of ideas that they'll give the students that they can choose from. Some faculty do it like that. If you have students who have had some experience in college, and it's a sort of a middle to upper division course, then it makes sense to give them a little bit more choice in the situation. And that's what I do. The second is to give students the opportunity to present different ways. Now in my class I limit it because I want it to be sort of streamlined the way I run my class. But you have to decide, okay, what's the final product going to be? You have to decide on the issue first, and then how will that issue be manifested? Okay, so what are you going to have them do? They have to write a term paper, they have to create a poster, they have to do a blog, they have to do a website, they have to do a podcast. What is it you're going to have them do? And what kind of choices you're going to give them? The third thing is that you've got to provide students the time and the opportunity to become experts on that issue. Because they're going to come up with a solution, they're going to come up with a project that they have to create, they've got to have some knowledge here. Many students will get that from what you're teaching during the course. But if it's a capstone course, something they're taking their last semester, then it's a little bit different. They should have already accumulated that area of expertise, that knowledge, and simply go out and find more information to make a complete project. Number 4, they actually have to get out there and do it. So you've got to give them the opportunity and the time to go out there on their own, to do the library research, or go into businesses or community organizations, learn something that's going on there, and then design the project. Number 5, you've got to create the final product. And number 6, and this is key, this is your role, You provide feedback and guidance through that process. Okay? Any questions about those? Do you see what I mean earlier? That this is not rocket science here. This is really something pretty simple. Sir?
For this project-based learning, so do we have to introduce, implement introduction courses are only for the higher level courses, PBL?
So the question is PBL only for higher level courses? The answer is yes and no. I'm a psychologist, and there's never a yes or no answer in life. Okay, there's always qualifications. So let me explain that for you. It works best in higher level courses because students have accumulated some experience and knowledge. But there are some teachers who really want to get the class actively involved. And so what they will do is that they will have very simple projects that they ask the students to do. They don't require a lot of complication. Don't require a lot of extra effort. And sometimes they'll say, we want you to do this project in just 5 weeks as opposed to an entire semester. But true project-based learning is always going to be a semester-long project. Okay? So, you know, with these techniques, regardless of what the techniques are, you can do whatever you want. You know, you just take the basic shell, and then what you do with that is modify it to fit your teaching, to fit your course. So, any other questions or points, ladies? Any questions or points? It's a really simple process to do it. Now, harder part is going to be number 6. And that's because you're going to be dealing with students either in groups or individual. That's up to you whether you want to do group projects or individual projects. I like doing group projects because I've got less grading to do. So I might have a class, let's say, of 30 students. I put them in groups of 5. I only have 6 projects to evaluate as opposed to 30. So think about what you have to do too. Make this easy for you.